Okay, I am recording and I'm sharing. And away we go. Everyone can see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I can see my script, which is good. So everyone who's on the call right now knows how this works. Sometimes I give an introduction and sometimes I don't. And today I thought I'd skip the introduction. And yeah, so the category for today is arts and literature. And we're on the letter S for serious Unitarians. And I'm sorry it's not sexy. As a matter of fact, for arts and literature, maybe it should be. Or maybe it should be scandalous. And I am thinking about our first guest for today. So let's jump right into it, starting with Mary Shelley.
Oh.
So Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, as she was born to William Godwin and Mary Wollstonecraft, novelists and philosophers in their own right. Her father was briefly Unitarian before turning atheist. Her very Unitarian mother died from complications 11 days after her birth. So Mary Jr. grew up in the Godwin intellectual circle, surrounded by humanists and various liberal Christians. So although several Unitarian websites do claim young Mary, as far as I can find, she is only Unitarian by association. But I include her anyway because I like some scandal in my biographies, and young Mary obliges. In 1814, with the Napoleonic Wars not quite over, she met 22-year-old Percy Bysshe Shelley. Percy, like Mary, had the surnames of both his parents. Percy was married to a high-strung 19-year-old Harriet Westbrook. They had a toddler and another child on the way, but they were already estranged. You know those teenage marriages. Mary eloped to Europe with this son of a Bysshe and came home pregnant. The baby was premature and died.
Oh.
Mary and Percy were ostracized and penniless for the next 2 years. Percy was a wonderful and prolific poet, but not much published before his death because his stuff was mostly blasphemous and seditious. In 1816, poor Harriet drowned herself in Hyde Park, and Percy and Mary were then married. They moved to Italy in 1818, mostly to escape their debtors. 2 more children had been born, but both died in Italy, leaving Mary in depression. In the 19th century, this was unfortunate but not unusual. A 4th child, Percy Florence Shelley, was born in 1819, and he would live. After the Shelleys moved to Italy, her father was her literary agent in Britain. He declined to represent her for her novel Matilda, which is about father-daughter incest. Percy died young in 1822 in a boating accident. Their best friend, Lord Byron, died in 1824 while participating in the Greek revolt against the Turks. So if Mary wrote romantic and Gothic works, which she did, she could draw a lot of it from her own life. Mary wrote many books, and she edited the works of her husband Percy Shelley, but she is most famous for the story she wrote at Lake Geneva, age 19. The full title was Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus. It was a good summer for horror fans. Another in their party, John Polidori, used that rainy summer to write The Vampire, the first modern vampire story. On we go. Edmund Hamilton Sears was a Unitarian minister and theologian from the conservative and ultra-Christian side of our liberal faith, although he did still preach for women's suffrage and abolition. He wrote the Christmas carol, It Came Upon the Midnight Clear, in 1849. I found his portrait at www.antiwarsongs.org, and that is the right place. He wrote it as a peace song, following a nervous breakdown from overwork, while he was reflecting on the U.S. war with Mexico and the recent revolutions of 1848 across Europe. Catherine Helen Spence was a Scottish-born Australian writer living in Adelaide from age 14. She is well known there on a 10-cent stamp and the 2001 $5 bill and a well-received autobiography. She won fame as a politician and social reformer and as a writer. She was a part-time journalist starting in her teens and published her first novel, Clara Morrison, at 29. Catherine switched to a Unitarian congregation at age 25, and in her 50s she preached there from the pulpit. She worked always to improve the lot of women and children and co-founded a society to place children in orphanages, from orphanages into foster homes. She herself, though rejecting 2 suitors and remaining unmarried, raised 3 separate families of orphans. Stephan Stephansson was born in Iceland, but he moved to Wisconsin at age 19 and to Alberta at age 36, where he became a Canadian citizen. I'm not clear how closely he was connected with the new Iceland Unitarians of Gimli and Winnipeg, but in 1927 his funeral was held in the Icelandic Unitarian Church in Winnipeg. He was a freethinker and a follower of Ralph Waldo Emerson. He blossomed as a poet in Canada, but all of his poetry is written in Icelandic, and it's loved in Iceland, as shown by this stamp and a monument in northern Iceland. His home near Markerville is an Alberta historic site. Stephen was an insomniac and did most of his writing at night. His 6-volume collection of poetry is called Andvökur, meaning sleepless nights. William Lawrence Sullivan was a second-generation Irish-American raised in Massachusetts who became a Catholic priest in 1899. But he quit in 1910 after repeatedly being censured for liberal ideas, and he joined the American Unitarian Association. In 1912, he became a Unitarian minister, spending 9 of the next 23 years at All Souls Church in New York City. So many people have taken similar journeys of conversion. William made my list by publishing a book, Letters to His Holiness Pope Pius X, complaining about Catholic anti-modernism. Pius X's response was literally unanswerable. He put the book on the Vatican's banned book list. It remains the last American work banned by the Vatican, at least until Pope Francis watches Jersey Shore. This is Carl Sandburg. They should get Harrison Ford to play him in the movie, don't you think?
Yeah, that's right.
When asked directly about his religion, Carl said, quote, "I am a Christian, a Quaker, a Muslim, a Buddhist, a Shintoist, a Confucian, and maybe a Catholic pantheist or a Joan of Arc who hears voices. I am all of these and more. Definitely I have more religions than I have time or zeal to practice in true faith," unquote. On the other hand, Carl attended Unitarian service many Sundays with his Unitarian wife and daughters in Asheville, North Carolina, and his funeral was Unitarian. Anyway, his answer is a fairly you answer in the first place, so he's in the show. You probably know that Carl Sandburg was a populist American poet. He won 2 Pulitzer Prizes for poetry in 1919 and 1951, and the Robert Frost Medal in 1952. You may or may not know that he also won a Pulitzer Prize in History in 1940 for his biography of Abraham Lincoln. And if you know that, you may still not know that he was an admired urban folk singer and a popular children's author, writing new fairy tales for his own kids and other American children who could not relate to knights and princesses. I bet most couldn't relate to rutabagas either, but never mind. Carl was born in small-town Illinois to Swedish-American parents. He left school at 13 and took a job as a milk wagon driver, a porter in a barber shop, then a bricklayer, a Kansas wheat farm laborer, and an infantryman in the Spanish-American War. After a 2-week attempt at West Point and a short try at the Universalist Lombard College, he continued as an Illinois hotel servant and Omaha coal heaver before finally becoming a journalist for the Chicago Daily News and beginning his writing career. So his credentials for speaking for the American Midwest working man are well established. He was leftist. He joined the Socialist Party of America, where he met his wife Lillian, and served as secretary for the Socialist Mayor of Milwaukee from 1910 to 1912. He supported the Civil Rights Movement and was the first white to receive the NAACP's Silver Plaque Award. I'm ahead of myself. After he died in 1967, his ashes were placed at his boyhood home under Remembrance Rock, which was also the title of his only novel. President Lyndon Johnson said, "Carl Sandburg was more than the voice of America, more than the poet of its strength and genius. He was America." That is, of course, counterfactual, but it was still high praise. I'll finish with a few Sandburg quotes. "Time is the coin of your life. It is the only coin you have, and only you can determine how it will be spent. Be careful lest you let other people spend it for you. Nothing happens unless first we dream. A baby is God's opinion that the world should go on. Life is like an onion. You peel it off one layer at a time, and sometimes you weep." And perhaps his most famous, although a lot of people don't know it's him, "Someday they'll give a war and nobody will come." Vincent Silliman, I'm not sure that's how he pronounced his name, was a Unitarian minister for 62 years. He was also a major contributor and editor for hymnals over the decades. 2 children's hymnals, Beacon Song and Service Book of 1935, We Sing the Life in 1955, and Hymns for the Celebration of Life in 1964. That was the book that was used until we switched to our new gray book. If you go to a Unitarian church, you know what I'm talking about, Singing the Living Tradition. Frderick Steiger was a Canadian portrait painter. He also did abstract landscapes like the cityscape in the middle here. Yes, that is a cityscape. Margaret Sutton was the pen name of Rachel Beebe, the author of 38 Judy Bolton mysteries. Sutton was her husband's name, and I guess she just liked the name Margaret. After she was widowed at age 63 and married at 73, she changed her legal name to Margaret S. Hunting. Judy Bolton is not as famous as Nancy Drew, but still sold a very respectable 5 million copies. The original series was written from 1932 to 1967. It was recently revived with a 39th story written in 2012. Margaret wrote more than a dozen other books for children, some for the very young and some for teens. The strangest is Palace Wagon Family, a true story of the Donner Party. You may recall that only half the Donner Party survived a wagon trail ordeal and did so by eating dead party members. Margaret's book is historical fiction based on the memoir of 11-year-old Virginia Reed. The text for the book is not available online, but several reviewers on Amazon have fond and vivid memories of reading this true life adventure story as a child. James Brodie Shearer, who went by Brodie, was a Canadian artist and painter all his life. He was born and lived in Montreal, lived in France in the 50s, and then moved to Ottawa until his death at age 92. The young man in red is not a self-portrait. Brodie was 41 when he painted it. May Sarton. I had no picture of visual artist Brodie Shearer, but I was spoiled for choice with poet, novelist, and journalist May Sarton. There are many great pictures to choose from. May was born in Belgium, but in World War I her parents fled to Britain and then moved to the U.S. Her father, George Sarton, became a professor in the history of science at Harvard. Like many Harvard kids, May was raised Unitarian. May studied theater, but she made her life as a writer. She had 17 books of poetry, 20 novels, 2 children's books, and 13 autobiographical journals. She is best known for the journals. She wrote the first at age 47, shortly after the death of her father and the end of a 13-year relationship with her partner, Judy Matlack. To quote Wikipedia, quote, "In these fragile, rambling, and honest accounts of her solitary life, she deals with such issues as aging, isolation, solitude, friendship, love and relationships, lesbianism, self-doubt, success and failure, envy, gratitude for life's simple pleasures, love of nature, particularly of flowers, the changing seasons, spirituality, and, importantly, the constant struggles of a creative life," unquote. I will also quote from Sheila Ballantyne, writing in the New York Times Book Review. "It is clear that May Sarton's best work, whatever its form, will endure well beyond the influence of particular reviews or current tastes. For in it she is an example, a seeker after truth with a kind of awesome energy for renewal, and an ardent explorer of life's important questions. Her great strength is that when she achieves insight, one believes, because one has witnessed the struggle that preceded the knowledge. Her discoveries do not come cheap." Jerry Sohl. Looks like this is something I plan to fill in for the second edition. Because all I can tell you is that he was kind of appropriately, he was a science fiction writer who did episodes of The Twilight Zone and Star Trek. So his picture here is maybe appropriate. Did he lead the effort that convinced the Unitarian Universalist Association to pass the first ever gay rights resolution in 1970? I cannot re-find this factoid. It might be from a book. I have heard that he was the guy behind the gay rights resolution. Sorry, there's no picture for him. Come back in, I guess, 4 years and we'll fill that in. Robert Shaw was a choral conductor. He was successful straight out of college. In 1938, he trained a glee club for band leader Fred Waring. In 1941, he formed his own racially integrated collegiate chorale. He hit the big time in 1948 when he began performing with Toscanini and the NBC Symphony Orchestra. Toscanini said, "In Robert Shaw, I have at last found the maestro I have been looking for." Robert went on to work with RCA and in San Diego, Cleveland, and Atlanta. In addition to classical music, he recorded Irish folk music and sea shanties, spirituals and musical theater, and Christmas albums that have remained bestsellers since their first release. He chalked up 14 Grammy Awards, 4 ASCAP Awards, the first Guggenheim Fellowship awarded to a conductor, etc. And he was the Kennedy Center honoree for 1991. Lister Sinclair was born in the British Empire, specifically to Scottish parents in Mumbai, where his engineer father was working. He grew up in London, England, where he got terrible grades in school, but won a scholarship for his skill in mathematics. Whatever the reason for his bad grades, life would show that his language skills and general learning ability were even stronger than his math. He was a true polymath. In 1939, he took a vacation with his mother to the New York World's Fair. They got trapped in North America by World War II, and Lister settled in Canada for life. At the University of British Columbia, he earned a BA in math and physics and made a lifelong friend of classmate Pierre Burton. In 1942, he moved to the University of Toronto for his MA and began acting in CBC radio plays for the extra income. By 1944, this led to writing radio plays, the first of over 400 plays in his life. In 1955, he began appearing on television on Front Page Challenge and The Wayne and Schuster Show. He appeared in many CBC TV and radio shows, mostly panels and documentaries. Court of Opinion, Man at the Center, The Nature of Things, Morningside, Heritage Theater, and most famously over 2,000 episodes of his radio show, Ideas. Carl Seaburg started as a Massachusetts Universalist before the UUA merger. He was a minister, hymn writer, and longtime UUA staffer. Singing the Living Tradition, the Great Hymnal, has 7 of his hymns. Carl is closest to my heart, though, as a historian, an author and preserver of original liturgical material, and a president of the UU Historical Society. Pete Seeger, one of our stars for today. I see that this as well is waiting attention in the second edition, but let's see what we say. Seeger has great music credentials. His father was a Harvard-trained musicologist and a student of world music, although his father was not a UU. Mother was a concert violinist and became a teacher at Juilliard in New York City. His father divorced when Pete was 7 and remarried to Ruth Crawford, a major composer of modernist music and a contributor to Carl Sandburg's folk music anthology. So Pete had 4 half-siblings who all became folk singers. Pete also has great social action creds. His father had to resign from Berkeley in 1918 for his anti-war stance. In 1943, Peter married Toshi Aline Otha, who despite her name was born in Germany, although raised in Greenwich Village. It's interesting why her dad was in Germany. His dad had translated Marx into Japanese and been ordered into exile. But Japanese law at the time permitted the son to go into exile in the father's place. So he had an exiled Japanese father and an American mother. Pete and Toshi had 4 children. The first died at 6 months before Pete even saw him, but the other 3 survived to adults, and Pete has grandchildren. As a member of the Don Heights Choir, I was interested to see that PBS documentary for Pete Seeger is called The Power of Song. I guess he got the name before we got hold of it. Pete was well known on national radio in the 1940s, in the 1950s with the Weavers, and their biggest hit was Leadbelly's Goodnight Irene. He was blacklisted in the McCarthy, whatever you want to call them, persecutions of the early 1950s. He bought land in Hudson Valley in 1949 and lived in a trailer while building his log cabin. He learned the ukulele and switched to the banjo after first hearing a banjo. He joined the Young Communist League in 1936 and joined the Communist Party USA in 1942. So he was at least, I don't think there ever should have been a blacklist, but he was on it fair and square. But he did quit the Communist Party in 1949. He pled the First Amendment instead of the Fifth Amendment before the House Un-American Activities Committee. That means he simply said that he had the right to free speech, not that he had the right not to incriminate himself. But he did not give them information about other communist members. And in 1961, he was sentenced to 10 one-year terms in jail to be served simultaneously. But that was overturned on appeal. He popularized the 5-string banjo and invented the long neck banjo, which is 3 frets longer and tuned lower than the old-style banjo. He also helped popularize steel pan drums in America, going to Trinidad to film it and learn it. Some of his super well-known hits include Where Have All the Flowers Gone, which he wrote with Joe Hickerson, If I Had a Hammer, with Lee Hayes of the Weavers, and Turn, Turn, Turn. He also helped popularize We Shall Overcome, and his popularity was promoted by the young Bob Dylan. And that is Pete Seeger. Moving on to Rod Serling. Rod is best known as the face of the science fiction anthology TV series The Twilight Zone, but he actually did most of his work behind the scenes. He was a screenwriter, playwright, and TV producer, and frequently clashed with TV executives and sponsors for his stands on censorship, racism, and the anti-war movement. Rod grew up in a middle-class Jewish family south of Syracuse, New York. He was always into words. As an experiment, his family once remained silent for a 2.5-hour car drive to see if Rod would notice that he was the only one talking. He did not. In 1943, despite being accepted to college, he enlisted the day after he graduated from high school. He ended up in New Guinea and the Philippines, including heavy fighting with high casualties at Manila in February 1945. He ended the war with a Purple Heart, Bronze Star, and nightmares and flashbacks that lasted the rest of his life. This did have a deep influence on his writing. In 1948, he converted to Unitarianism in order to marry Carol Kramer, his lifelong wife, with whom he had 2 daughters. He graduated from Antioch College and became a writer for radio and television, going freelance as soon as he had enough credibility to sell his work. His breakthrough work was a TV play called Patterns, a story of ethics in conflict with ambition in the ruthless business world. The live TV performance was repeated so that it could be filmed a second time, and it was also remade as a movie. Requiem for a Heavyweight in 1956, drawing on Rod's background as an amateur boxer, cemented his critical acclaim and commercial success. Rod started the Twilight Zone in 1959 as a way to escape sponsor interference and censorship. Casting his stories as science fiction made him freer to explore racism, anti-war, and other social justice issues. The show ran for 5 years with only moderate ratings, but had huge success in reruns and was revived twice with new episodes. There was also a 1983 movie with 4 separate stories in 1983. The overall movie gets 3 out of 5 stars from the critics. I agree with that rating, but for my taste, the first story in it is a 5 out of 5. So if you ever get a chance to see the 1983 movie Twilight Zone, at least watch that one, and then you can turn it off. Rod's later shows, less successful, were a Western called The Loner. He was host of a game show called Liars Club, and he had Night Gallery, a kind of a repeat of Twilight Zone in a way, and a radio show called The 0 Hour. He also spoke frequently on college campuses, and he taught at Ithaca College. Rod died at the young age of 51 from a series of heart attacks. We've still got a couple to go in our arts and literature section. Mona Shaw is a retired Air Force nurse, married to an Air Force husband since 1962, living in Bristow, Virginia. In August 2007, at age 75, she ordered phone, internet, and TV service from the giant cable company Comcast. Then she and her husband had several bad customer service experiences in a row, the last one being left to sit outside in the broiling sun for 2 hours before being told to go away because the manager had gone home for the day. Well, the next Monday, Mona took a hammer over to the service center and smashed the receptionist's keyboard, monitor, and telephone, asking, "Now, do I have your attention?" She got attention from the police, but also from the national newspapers and from the website www.comcastmustdie.com. And she is now a typically American kind of hero. Anyway, I thought I could include Mona the Hammer in the arts category as a performance artist promoting the development of improved television viewing experiences. Jim Scott is a jazz, classical, and folk songwriter and guitarist. His internet biography does not give his birthday, but he attended the Eastman School of Music at Rochester University from 1963 to 1968. He has many songwriting credits, including co-writing the 1981 Missa Gea, A Mass for Earth, with Paul Winter for the Paul Winter Consort. To give you a sense of him, some representative titles are A Song for the Earth, Earth, Sky, Love and Dreams, Sailing with the Moon, his musical The Tree and Me, and children's songs The Rainforest Song and Plant More Than You Harvest. So we could call him a strong environmentalist. He also wrote the UU hymns Gather the Spirit and Common Ground. He conducts the Worcester, Massachusetts Community Choir. I'm just realizing I should ask my cousin Jane if she knows him. Jim has performed in every state except Alaska, and in many other countries, and at Carnegie Hall. In addition to Paul Winter, he has shared the stage with Pete Seeger, Peter Yarrow of Peter, Paul and Mary, John Denver, Tracy Chapman, Joan Baez, Joni Mitchell, Jackson Brown, Dan Fogelberg, 10,000 Maniacs, that's the name of the band, not he, and Odetta. Scott is an active UU and has co-chaired the Seventh Principle Project, a UU initiative since 1991, with charity tax status since 2002, promoting ecological initiatives such as certification of green sanctuary congregations. To digress on that point, I had never heard of the Seventh Principle Project. Judging only by their web presence, they are not very active, but they are one of dozens of groups affiliated with a Yale University forum on religion and ecology. Being curious, I learned that there is also a First Principle Project since 2014. That one seeks to change the first principle to recognize the inherent worth and dignity of every being, including animals. Frankly, I think that will be a tough sell at the UUA, but it's an interesting talking point. It's not that the UUA doesn't like animals, it's that they probably feel that the seventh principle already has them covered, and they're not willing to water down the rights of humans in order to bring in the rights of animals. Just guessing. The other 5 principles seem to currently be without projects in case you feel like starting one. 3 to go. Pat Scanlon, Where is the Rage? He is a folk singer and a Vietnam veteran, active in the anti-war movement with a group called Veterans for Peace. One of his songs is Extremists, which he wrote after a Freedom of Information disclosure showed that U.S. surveillance documents had referred to Veterans for Peace as an extremist group. A sample of the lyrics: "They call us extremists because we're out here in the street. How unpatriotic, Veterans for Peace. They say we got to watch them like never before because there's nothing more dangerous than veterans against war." Other songs are War is Not the Answer, Where is the Rage, and I've Got a Feeling I've Been Here Before, about the war in Iraq. Where is the Rage? Fred Small is a folk singer and UU minister. His lyrics cover climate change, LGBTQ support, and a wide range of social concerns. His website says that he was hailed by Pete Seeger as, quote, one of America's best songwriters, unquote. Oh, 2 left. Alyson Schafer is a family counselor, TV host, columnist, and the author of books on parenting, with several foreign translations. 3 of her titles are Ain't Misbehavin', Honey, I Wrecked the Kids, and Breaking the Good Mom Myth. And we're finishing the section with St. Vincent. This is the stage name for musician Annie Clark, who was raised UU. She won a Grammy for Best Alternative Album and has collaborated with Dave Byrne of Talking Heads. As of 2017, she is also the director of an anthology horror film with an all-female cast called XX and is sponsoring a fragrance brand for Tiffany and Company. St. Vincent is another artist with many great pictures to choose from. Like Madonna or Lady Gaga, she has made fashion changes a part of her show, and I think she's done it well. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to stop recording as soon as I remember how.